Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Damn Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast. As always, we are your hosts, Eva and
Maren.
And today we have Elizabeth back with us. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hello.
We are doing another Damn Good Book Club. Today's book is How to Talk to Your Kids so they are going to listen, and also how are you going to listen so that they're going to be able to talk to us. It's kind of a well-popularized book because it's actually been out for over 40 years, re-edited about a decade ago. So most of you are going to have heard about this book. Maybe many of you have actually read this book, but we thought it would be a good idea just to kind of get into the nitty-gritty because it was actually referenced in a previous book that we had. I think it was Dan Siegel, that there was a reference to this book. And so that's why we wanted to take it up and say, let's do this book because, you know, most people have heard of it, have seen it for sure. It's a nice yellow book usually in one of the versions. So Elizabeth, start the book club.
So How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele, Faber, and Elaine Mazlish, which from all I know, I think that they are just parent coaches at this point. Like what they do is go around and teach this workshop, or what they did. I don't know if they're still doing it because they're probably, if they're still alive, much older now, but I believe their daughter now runs their workshops. And she actually wrote an afterword in this version, which is the 2012 version, which kind of takes up the idea of how the next generation is looking at the points that they bring up in this book. That was kind of one of the main things, as Eva just mentioned, is it was published first in 1985. So when we're looking at this book and reading this book and thinking about the concepts in here, they feel familiar now, I think is how you kind of put it. So it is a great reference book, I think, just like when we did Whole Brain Child, for like things that we can use, because there's cartoon illustrations, there's role plays, there's scripts, there's examples from their workshop, there's anecdotes, there's homework exercises in this book. They give you assignments to do. So it's a good thing to, if you want to keep pushing yourself to think about how to really see your child and know your child and talk to them in a way that's not going to upset them. But my caveat, that being said, it feels really old. It feels like these are things that we know kind of already, and we can use other resources like the Whole Brain Child that's a bit more updated, I guess I would say. Would you guys agree?
Yeah,
that's how I also felt. I was like, all right, I saw this more of another reminder of, okay, we keep doing this. Why is it important? It was not any news to me. The things that I did like was sometimes the easy approach. If there's this one thing where they talk about the feelings and they say, just acknowledge them with a sound. Like just say, I see. And that's what I'm sometimes missing a little bit in the newer books that are out there, that sometimes they're overcomplicating a little bit of, you need to address this and you need to say this and you need to say that. And they just say, just hum and be like, I see. So that was the nice thing where I was like, oh, cool. They don't overcomplicate it many points, but at the same time, it wasn't a newsflash. However, it's always a good reminder, and good reminders are always good because they keep us going with the things that sometimes we're questioning, and we tend then in stressful situations to fall back into how, at least I can speak for me, how I was raised, where there was not so much of, oh, let's work through this feeling, let's understand the child, but more like, I'm the parent, I'm calling the shots, this is what we're doing. Sometimes I think, oh man, this situation would be so much easier for me if I would do this, but of course I'm not. So it's always good then to remind yourself that in those stressful situations where you could slip into your own patterns back, that you have this in the back of your head, a constant, again, reminder to heighten the chances that you're not going to react out of your old patterns, but actually put the new patterns into place.
Mm-hmm. And Eva, what about you? What was your take on its outdatedness, if you will, or what was still helpful?
For me, I honestly went into the book thinking it was actually going to shed something because so many people have spoken about it. I even think Simone Davis has even mentioned it. You had it in your background when we spoke a couple of months ago. I mean, so I really was thinking, oh, what am I missing? And so I was really keen to get into the book to see what I am missing. And exactly that. I just feel like it's outdated. I feel like this is stuff people are doing. Now, maybe it's because of this book in the 1980s that it generated this kind of wave of parents who started being those parents who actually listen to their kids, and therefore those kids have now grown up and are now doing that with. So maybe this is actually thanks to them that we're doing what we're doing. But right now it doesn't feel like it's very new to us, I guess. And like the whole emphasis of just kind of like empathizing with your child, you know, giving them that recognition. As Maren said, it's like, it's not the authoritarian childhood that most of us would have had in the 70s and 80s, or in Maren's case, 90s. But it's a thing that I'm like, I didn't take anything away of like, not value, but of substance that kind of made me feel like, oh, because sometimes the examples they gave were quite generic and I didn't feel that they were super applicable or perfect examples, I guess, because I'm hard to place things like as an example for myself. So I kind of struggled with that element.
What I found interesting, because it has been updated in 2012, and I think probably previous updates before that, like it feels like the text itself is still like what they wrote in the 80s. Like I'm surprised they're not updating the examples because, you know, they talk about right away, she's like, my daughter was bothering me and then I slapped her. Like that's one of her, like, you know, and then she's like, now what I should have done instead is, and it just doesn't feel like those are the issues that we're having right now. Or like, should, like my choice is slap my kid or ask them how, like about their emotions. And I felt like a lot of the examples too had a lot of like food restriction examples. There was like a lot of like talking about, oh, how, you wanted another piece of cake, but we shouldn't have another piece of cake, which also felt really outdated to me, that there was so many like, let's be conscious of how much food we're eating, you know, which are just little things. But when you're reading it, it makes you feel like, is this of our era? Like, is this going to be applicable to me? Because it feels not, you know?
The other element,
and then at the same time was that it doesn't address the topics of our times, screen time.
Yeah.
TV. I'm not even talking about internet and all these kind of things, or things of which is big thing in our household, quick availability of things. So when my daughter wants something, she says, well, just order it. Just go on your phone. Like it's like for them, like this whole thing of everything is available.
Instant
all the time,
gratification.
at all times. Yeah.
Yikes.
It's like, these are the topics that I would wish to read. How am I going to deal with screen time? How am I going to deal with the web? How am I going to deal with all this availability all the time? How am I going to deal with the topic of our era?
The other issue, though, that I do want to address is living in Amsterdam and having so many mixtures of different cultures. I do feel there was a bit of it was lacking kind of a cultural adaptation, maybe, because everyone has like different cultures have different, ways of bringing up their children. And so the thing is, that's one thing, but obviously you're not going to be able to write a book that's going to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, but there was something in the afterwards. So the afterwards written by their daughter, which does try to update. Here's some things you can use. I don't think she gets into screen time. I can't remember, but she does try to update it a little bit for today's examples. But I did notice she like kind of coded, like I worked at a school in West Harlem, and it was, you know, like a coded way, like, which also really turned me off. Like, oh, the hard kids, and it's like there's hard kids everywhere, like, you know. So I definitely think, it's missing its diversity as well. So I would agree with that. I'm going to get into some things it does do well. So I will say that some of the things that at least jumped out to me because I was like, what can I use, right? Like, what are the things that are happening to us right now? And one of the things that stood out to me was, right, like their main kind of point was less is more. Listen, I mean, it's in the title. Like, don't give advice and repeat back feelings or use one word commands. So if you want them to do something, like just say shoes, if they keep tracking their shoes through the house. And that's a reminder, like, oh yeah, mom's told me to put the shoes in the, like, you don't have to keep saying over and over again the full thing. But so something that stood out to me that was different that I haven't used before is wishes in fantasy. Do you guys remember this? So the idea is, so if your kid wants, because all the time, my daughter wants a cracker in the stroller. If I forget the crackers, there's nothing I can do, right? There are no crackers, but she's 19 months. She doesn't understand the concept of there are no crackers, right? So she's just upset. It's not there. She wants it. So they're saying that you can lean into also wanting that thing with them and be really grandiose about it. Like, oh my God, I wish I had 1,000,000 crackers to give you. If I had 1,000,000 crackers to give you right now, I would give you that cracker right away. And I tried it with her in the stroller the other day, and she wasn't having it at first. She was just like, yeah, but you're still saying cracker. But then just because my attitude was more like, oh my God, you know, like this kind of over the top silliness, it transitioned into a conversation. Then it was like, oh, do you see that bird in the tree? And then she started looking at the birds in the tree. And so already it pulled me out of that space of like stress that I didn't have a cracker for her. And I think that was really the job it was doing. It's like, she was like, I don't care. And if she was older, maybe she would have played, like if she could get into the fantasy, like maybe she would have played with me. But I think it more removed me from the worry. It was like, well, we're just going to do this little like pretend dialogue right now. And I can't give you a cracker. So that was one thing that I'm going to try to use from the book, So was there something that you guys found that like, at least like, even I know you were saying that it felt like nothing stood out, but maybe Maren, there was something that stood out to you.
The whole thing of punishment, like alternatives to punishment, because this is really one that I struggle with. It's like, okay, there need to be consequences, but then making the differentiation between punishment and consequences and really walking that line and trying to explain, but not overly complicate. So this is where, this is then when also this whole thing of going into fantasy would I apply also in this situation? Like, all right, if we do this now, then the outcome is going to be that and the result is going to be that. Do we want that? Remember how that was last time, and then linking it back to, they said a little later in the book where if they've done something good or if they've done something right in quotation way, then you remind them of that, and like so they can tap into that energy. And that's what I found useful, and also for me to validate that I'm doing this right. I did that initially, like just out of my thought, okay, I'm just gonna try because it makes sense to me, and just reading it, all right, it does make sense, and here are the reasons why, so I can keep doing that. So I found that helpful, reading more about this whole line between punishment and how it's not doing anything and how it's not achieving like the long-term goal of them learning because they understand, but because I don't want her to react out of fear, but I want her to react out of understanding and to nourish that more. I thought that was very helpful. Anything that's helping with setting these boundaries with cooperative way, I think is always something that I like to take away, because this is such a big thing that I need to unlearn. The punishment part and this whole like I'm just shutting this down and like no, and like I'm like this whole power struggle that it's so easily to get into, for me at least, to really break this. So I'm longing for everything. All right, let's try it that way and let's look to it from this angle and let's put this into action. So this helps me the most in these parenting books with, my biggest takeaways, because that's the biggest thing I struggle with.
Yeah, so they say in the book it's prevention versus punishment. So they want you to work on prevention instead of punishment. And I do really like this. I do think that this is a nice part of the book, is brainstorm solutions together and settle on the ones you both agree on. And they point out that the list of solutions can be as absurd. You're going to take every idea. So you don't turn anything off. So the example they use in the book is that the kid is always coming home late, which again, I love, like, because there's no cell phones and they're like, the kid uses the clock tower that rings at 6 to let them know it's time to come home. And you're like, oh my God. But the solution they have to solve is that the kid needs to be home for dinner at 6. And so they sit down and he says, I should get to stay out until 6:15. And she's like, okay, and writes it down. Even though in her head, she's like, no, you can't. But she takes every idea, even he's like, I need a new watch, like, okay. And then after they have and then the mom also gets to write down solutions. So you as a parent are also like, well, I think we should do this. And if the kid wants to say no, you're like, okay, well, we're still writing it down. Like, so once you have the whole list of possible solutions, you then go through and you get to say which you can't do. So as a parent, you say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do dinner at 6:15. Dinner is ready at 6. That can't be a solution. Or we can't afford to buy you a new watch. So that can't be a solution. And the kid can also do it too. So the kid can also kind of be like, well, I'm not doing this one. And together you come to the solution. So I do really like that is not a stage I'm at. Like my daughter can't fully speak words yet, but it's like one that I know in the future, like I want to try. And then what you said about the author points out about consequences is don't put consequences on the list. So don't even bring them up. So the idea is not that, well, if this doesn't happen, if you're not home by 6, then this will happen. You're going to give them that chance. You're like, well, this is it. This is what you've promised to do. And I can't remember what the book says, because they don't want you to do punishment. So
It says that punishment may make you obey the external rules, but it does little to build an internalized sense of right or wrong. And then it goes into the fact that it teaches alternatives to punishment that they claim are far more effective at achieving the desired behavior than punitive measures. Which I think, like you're saying, it like at the end, because all of this is really reminding me of like Simone Davis from Montessori, where you have your notepad and you're like, because it's the whole acknowledgement And it's the respect to the child to say, I'm going to listen to you and we're going to work it out. And it's the problem ownership as well, is that if that was also the other thing, actually, when there was actually a problem, is when the child's having an issue, it's actually beginning to bother the parent because they're like, well, I can't force you to do something because I don't want to do that. But at the same time, we got to work it out. And it's the fact that this book, I think, is really important for some parents, especially the non-default parent, to read, because it's the parent's responsibility to communicate how they feel about it, rather than just doing the punishment and the demanding of the behavior that they seek from that child. I find that with the default parent, the kid is a lot more adaptable because the default parent more likely to sit down and listen and be empathetic and get on their eye level and kind of say, okay, let's work it out. Whereas the non-default parent really just kind of comes in kind of like, yeah, well, I see she does it with you, he or she. They do it with you, so they're going to do it with me. But it doesn't do that because you have a different relationship. And so that's the thing, is it's a kind of a case of, yeah, but you have to communicate. Communication is a two-way street. So you have to figure out your communication channel amongst each other as well. And so them doing a punishment with that is just, you're just creating it like this massive explosion. So yeah, so the one takeaway I think would be the fact that I think this is a really good book for a non-default parent without placing blame on anyone.
And I will say, like, the little cartoons, which also feel outdated style-wise, but they are helpful to give the non-example and the good example, you know, like, so it's like if you do have the book and you just want to quickly read through, I think it's too full of stories from their groups. So I'll be honest, I skipped over large portions where they're like, just, and here's what the parents in our group did. Like, they just give examples from their like learning. I skip those parts because, like, you've already told me what I'm supposed to do. I don't need to hear about other parents doing it. But the cartoons do give good little examples about how to say things the right way. So, you know, if your non-default parent doesn't want to read the whole book, you could literally just be like, go through and read the cartoons.
They can just listen to this podcast. If they don't want to read the book, they can come back to this podcast. And let's like just put it this way, as everyone is a bit busy parent, at the end of the day, some of the techniques in this book is actually going to feel very time consuming. And that, I think, everyone needs to know is applicable to every single parent, default, non-default, any carer, grandparent, friend, aunt, uncle, or whatever. Every effort requires time consumption to put it in, and boundaries and
consistency.
But it's also the fact that it takes so much power within ourselves to emotionally regulate ourselves, because we just want to flip out. As parents, we're trying our best. You know, it's like that episode we did with Dr. Naomi about parenting from the same page. It's that idea that like we really need to be united. And we both need to be able to say, this is how we talk to our child. We acknowledge them, we respect them, we listen to them. We honor our child. And I keep going back to Simone Davis. She really is like this book really is quite a Montessori book in a way that you're like, I'm acknowledging you. I'm listening to you. We're creating boundaries. I'm giving you independence, because giving choices was one of the topics as well. Offering children choices, obviously with the limits, empowers them to make them feel more in control and responsible for their own actions. So like, do you want to do your homework, for example, before or after dinner kind of thing? That gives that adult child, well, not adult, but older child. With a younger child, it could be like, do you want this cookie or do you want this cracker? You know, and that's something I think Montessori has always been in me. I've always done that because it's about giving that child a little bit of power. But I think I always just come back to this whole default parenting and non-default parenting aspect of this.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I didn't cover it before, but just to give, again, people listening. So the major chapters in the book, just so everybody like knows what it covers, is help kids deal with feelings, engage cooperation, alternatives to punishment, encouraging autonomy. So that's what you're talking right now, the choices, praise, and freeing children from playing roles. So we've covered a little bit about the feelings, about listening, and a little bit about punishment, and now talking about choices, autonomy. So I was thinking about the playing roles part was actually interesting to me, because some of it feels like you're doing the right thing. That's like a positive. It kind of goes hand in hand with the praise chapter, that they don't want you to label your kid, even if it's like, you're so smart, you know, which is kind of, you know, this idea like, you're so smart, because it also puts that pressure, right? Like, oh, I'm supposed to be smart. And if I do something wrong, and that like fix versus growth mindset. And then another thing that surprised me, which I'm actually trying to work on, because we do this all the time, because she used to be just a blob of a baby. don't talk about your child in front of them, no matter how young. They say that on page 162. And they say that it makes them feel like an object and a possession of the parent. And this one was really hard for me because I'm like, how do you rephrase it? Like, I want to tell my husband when he comes home, like, oh my God, she did this thing. It's so cute. She's sitting right there looking at me. And I'm like, and then Eloise did this. And then she did this. And like, it feels like a positive. So I've been trying to like kind of look at her. And I'm like, so Eloise, right, what was that thing that you did? She doesn't answer. She's like, I can't say those words yet. And I'm like, oh yeah, didn't you do this thing? It was really cute. And like, I've been just trying to rephrase that, but it's really hard. So that was something I found interesting about the playing roles section of the book, is that even if we think we're doing like a positive for the kid, we want to allow them to be their own person and not be like, well, I'm the middle child and this is my role and that means I'm this, or like I'm the kid who, they have a whole section where they give those examples where you read it and it's like, even if you think you're not telling your kid that they're clumsy, even if you think you're not telling your kid that they are a little bit slow, they like wrote this section to show how the parents are showing it anyways and how they talk around the kid. And that was really powerful to me because I could really feel it. Like reading the section, I was like right away, like, oh yeah, I kind of feel like I'm a clumsy kid. I kind of feel like what they're saying like is making me feel like I can't pick that glass up, or I can't, like help with the puzzle. So I found that section to be interesting still.
Yeah, that element also kind of reminds me of the whole idea that you're not meant to fix it, but that's also leading to the independence where you're meant to kind of just allow the child to basically make their own mistakes, crack that egg, break the egg, spill the milk, whatever it is. And it's a case of exactly like you said, and even the words you said, they're smart. Yeah. I realized, I was like, oh, that was such a smart idea. Like I've said that like nonchalantly. And that's the whole thing that this comes back to, is like it's constant reminder. And it's like the Dan Siegel book and everything else. If you read these books, you'll kind of get these words into your mind and you'll get into this flow. And it's about being in the village and the community of everyone having a shared mindset of, oh, yeah, try and avoid these words. It's just a constant battle of trying to remember, like, okay, don't use smart and don't use, clumsy, because sometimes these words can actually resonate and then they can kind of make the child think, oh, and the next time they hear it, it can kind of have a bit more impact and a bit more impact. And it's really hard. Like, it's so hard to kind of correct yourself and to find another way and create a different wording system, I think, around it as well.
Yeah, I also want to jump in there because I feel like sometimes it's like pick your fights or like pick your battles, I guess is the more appropriate ones of, I think it does more harm if I punish my child, if I don't respect them, if I do all these things, than telling them that was a smart idea. Yeah. So like also, it's like also seeing as a parent, because we're talking about this book now and you maybe listener are like, oh my God, like I can't do anything right. So it's like, cut yourself some slack and also remember that these are all different communication sectors and pick one that you struggle with and that you really feel if it helps you, if you've improve your communication in that area, instead of, okay, now I have to, because when you read these books, like every sentence all of a sudden becomes so aware and you can't, all this natural flow gets a little lost because oh no, okay, I can't say I'm looking at their picture now. I can't say that I find it beautiful because then I'm labeling it. And then and then you get into this whole thing of like, just tell them this is a beautiful picture. And then maybe don't get upset when they spill the milk. Like also pick your areas that you really think will improve the relationship with your child and really improve your communication and help them understand themselves a little better instead of then, all right. And then if you perfection it, then you can do the next one. This is what I just want to throw in there because sometimes I'm like, all right, what's the damage done, right? Like, is she gonna think she's smart? Oh my God, boo-hoo, she thinks she's smart. Like, also cut yourself some slack with this and focus on the things that are really damaging or really could be hurtful or really could be a problem for them growing up, in not just with their own interaction with themselves, but also with the interaction connection with their peers, with their friends, with the environment and the society.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, in teaching, we used to do this too, because we'd always, every summer, they'd make us read a book, and you have to, like, take something from that book and apply it to your teaching. And I don't remember what was a book or somebody at my school who said this, but like, take one of the things and try to practice that all year long.
Yeah.
So like, I remember one year I practiced I noticed statements. Like, so, you're just like, I noticed that you did that. Or I know, which is similar to in this book, they say, describe what you see. So like, again, instead of being like, you spilled the milk and now it's all over the floor, you would be like, I see that there's some milk on the floor. And then the kid might go get a rag and go clean it. Like, that's all you have to say. But so this idea, like, choose the one thing and be like, the next 6 months, that's the one thing I'm going to practice doing. Like, this is the thing that I know I need to work on. And then if you master that and there's something else, like, try that for the next 6 months or whatever, instead of the pressure of I have to do all these things. And then the book points out, I do want to point out 2 things. They say on page 34, life with children is always open-ended. You always get another chance to do it right, to do it again, etc. So this idea, there's always a new day, right? So it's like, oh, I didn't do a thing and said the thing the way I was supposed to say the thing. Well, tomorrow you're going to get another chance. Like, and it also said children aren't robots. We are not programming them to respond the same way each time. These are just tools, right? So they're not always going to respond to your describing what you see and getting the rag because you describe, but we're giving ourselves tools and them tools to be able to talk to each other in a better way,
I just want to bring back something you've just said, because I think that's actually one of the best takeaways for the listeners here you just said it's not even in the book, but it's something you've just said that I'm like, oh, anyone listening to this podcast, you can take away what you want from the book, but Elizabeth has actually given you a really good tip. Work on one thing for 6 months and just every single day, just apply it as much as you can, be it, I noticed that. And that's something I'm going to take away. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's actually something quite interesting for me to take away.
Right. Well, I'm glad.
That's what book club's for just finding out anything right now.
Yeah, right.
And also what I think is important, and this is also then coming back to what Eva said with the default parent, communication is a skill that can be learned. Mm-hmm. Communication, if you are doing it naturally, great, good job, which we are not supposed to say, I know. But it's also the thing of if someone has struggled with this, they can learn it. Mm-hmm. And there's no excuse to not do it, because in other areas, we're also open to learning. When we're in our paid jobs in the office and we have a new program, then we sit down and learn it and we read the manual and we take step 1, 2, 3, 4 to get the result. And we also don't always call our colleagues every 5 minutes. Did I do this right? Did I do this right? You're doing it that way. No, like apply those things that you have in other areas where you need to learn a new skill and you need to practice and you need to make your own mistakes and you need to live with the result. This is the same for communication. Mm-hmm. It is learnable. There is a script of like, okay, these are the words, these are the phrases. I'm trying them out. I see the result. I alternate. It is nothing that the non-default parent says, but you're just so good with this, or like you just understand. Like maybe that is a part of it, but at least for me, I also had to practice it, and I also had to read upon it, and I also had to get the information. So communication is not something that's just embedded in us and then we just talk and that's what it is, but we learn how to communicate. So also get your partner or whoever is the other caregiver, make this their responsibility. They can learn it. They don't have to not do it. They can, if they really want it, they can learn it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's where, like you pointed out, that's where books like these might be helpful. I was also thinking too, like, when you think about like, if there is somebody who still uses slapping as a way to communicate, like, this should be a book at like a parenting class for parents who have been like put on, like it feels like it's the baseline book. It's like not only is it the foundation for gentle parenting, I think now, like I think had this book not been written in 1985, as Eva pointed out earlier, like we would not have what we have today. So we need to give gratitude to the book for that. Also think it's like the baseline communication level. So it's like for families that are screaming at their kids and still using, corporeal punishment and, like this should be the starter book. Start here. And then graduate on to some others. There is one, so I always like to read a passage from the books. There is one passage I want to read. It's on 238 in my copy, and it's kind of the end of the book. And they wrote one final thought. Let's not cast ourselves in roles either. Good parent, bad parent, permissive parent, authoritarian parent. Let's start thinking of ourselves as human beings first, with great potential for growth and change. The process of living or working with children is demanding and exhausting. It requires heart, intelligence, and stamina. When we don't live up to our own expectations, and we won't always, let's be as kind to ourselves as we are to our youngsters. If our children deserve 1,000 chances and then one more, let's give ourselves 1,000 chances and then 2 more. I thought that was the best part of the book. But I think it speaks to what you're saying too. Like we can learn this, and it's okay if we mess up, we always get another chance as well,
Yeah, I think with that, more or less, yeah, we agree with the book. We think we haven't learned too much new from the book, but that could be from the implementation over 40 years. So what would the rating be for you, Elizabeth?
I think like a 3.5. I think a solid. I still think it was like when I read it, there was parts that were useful, but I read it, like I said, skipping over large chunks. I think that, yeah, a 3.5.
And Maren?
Yeah, I would also say 3.5, just because it is the basics, it is the fundamental for everything else, and it is important. It is the same thing over and over again that we've heard many, many times. However, that's the point of it, to really put it into action. So I think it's still super valid. I think it's still a great read to either refresh, remind yourself, or get in touch with the whole topic. Also, this could be a good book, like Eva said, to give to the non-default parent, but also to give to your parents, the grandparents, or like anyone who's not in our generation, who still might use this kind of language or these kind of sentences. I mean, my parents or like my mother has learned, of course, not to physically punish my daughter, but she still uses some sentences where I'm like, no, this doesn't fly with me. So there is a change, of course, in that behavior that she had towards me, than she has towards my daughter, but the communication still lacks a little bit. So I think this could be then a good basis still for someone else to read. So yeah, I would agree with 3.5. Yeah.
I think I'm the same as well. But the funny thing is, when I go to the Goodreads, because I always go to the Goodreads because we're the damn good, they gave it a 4.28, which was really, and that's out of 35,000 ratings. I was interested to see like what were their comments. Now it just seems to be kind of more or less like, oh, this is a great parenting. I would be interested,
what's the age? What's the age?
Well, this is a good comment that people, I think there's 259 likes this one specific comment, and it said this should be subtitled "Baby Boomer Parents Backlash Against Harsh Old School Discipline." Yeah. So I think that really resonates with what basically we've been saying. Is just it's a very old school correctional kind of book to help people understand how to actually raise children, so that you're not basically just constantly bombarding your children with requests and demands and punishment. So yeah, I mean, everyone says it. There's a lot of child psychologists as well, or child therapists, child counselors who say this is a great book. This is what parents need, because obviously there are a lot of parents out there who do need help, and it could be cultural, it could be age related, it could be any kind of effect. So as I said, I do think it's a default parent specific book, because a child will always have not an attraction, that's the complete wrong word, but a link to one parent specifically. And so to help the other parent understand and be kind of able to understand basically where you might be going with it, I think it's a great book to have maybe in your library at home.
One thing that I also wanted to say, why I still think these books have all the relevancy in the world, as long as there still is sleeping, training, Faber, all this shit is still out there and is revised and republished. And then I think we forget that these old techniques are still out there, just in another costume, just in another label. So as long as I'm still stumbling across those techniques, then I still think this book has still the right validation to be out there, to be read, to be recommended, to be talked about, because these other techniques have not disappeared. It's not like we fully let go of them. We fully let go of all that. How could we? We are basically the first generation that does it different. So we still have this energy in our families, in our circles, it's still alive and there. We should not forget that we still have to put a counterpart to the things from the past that are still republished, that are still retaught, that are still happening in daycares, in schools, in homes. So it doesn't always have to be the full new thing, but the basis still need to stand up to the old crap that's still out there.
Because it's been around forever, because it is 40 years old, there's plenty of secondhand copies of this book. Probably very readily available at any library, like as an ebook. So again, if all you want to do is flip through and read those cartoons, that gives the examples about how to use the language. Because we didn't actually get very granular in the details from the book about, like say this or do that. This isn't a book that can break your bank. Like you can find a secondhand copy that someone's giving away. You can get it from the library, and then you can.
Well, that was the thing I was going to say is you can't get it actually from the library physically on the OBA, but just so you know. But yes, you can definitely get them secondhand. They're always floating around, and I've actually even seen one on a street library on one occasion in one of the regions. So don't go breaking the bank. I don't think you need to buy it new, but you definitely. It's an interesting read just to flick through it. Equally, just to give it to your partner if they're kind of struggling as well. As I said, Simone Davis always comes up. So it's quite a Montessori approach of respect for the child, space for the child, having the notepad as well. The Montessori notebook is what she's very well known for. Having that, helping them understand why you're doing it.
The book is also in her classroom library. So if there's anyone out there who's going to her classes, the book is in her classroom and you can always take it from there. So there's one copy where I know it is to grab.
Yeah, it's been an interesting book. I think, as I said, I think I'm going for 3.5. So this is maybe one of the lower scores we've given for a book, but I think it's just down to the age of the book and its way that way, I guess. So do go out, have a read, even if you just read over it once, and let us know what you think. Our next book club coming up in December. Elizabeth, do you want to tell us a bit about the book?
Yeah, so we thought we'd kind of just veer towards fun because December and the holidays and no one wants to feel like they have homework when they're hosting a whole bunch of people. So we're going to read a fiction book, which is Why Mummy Drinks at Christmas by, I think it's Jill Sims is the author, but I should double check that. And it's just going to be a humorous story that we will treat as a book club book, more like, I always say it wrong, matrescence. How do you say it?
Matrescence.
Matrescence. So we'll probably discuss it more that way, just like, what did we think was fun? What did we think was silly in the story? So it's just going to be an end of the year, Christmas. Let's just have some fun. Let's just have a laugh. Nothing serious book. So hopefully everybody chooses to read along with us as well.
Which is a great way to end the year. If you guys actually have a book you want us to read, do our homework and actually break down as well, you can always drop a line. You can drop a line to us on our Instagram page, Damn Parenting Podcast. You can also email us at damnparentingpodcast@gmail.com. We're always open. We've got a list of books that we've actually worked out, but maybe you guys have a specific book that you're thinking, hey, what do you guys think? So do drop us a line.
Yes, and if you want to hear more from us, every Wednesday we're coming out with an expert episode. Please make sure that you subscribe to our Instagram channel, Damn Parenting Podcast, and also follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Give us a 5-star rating so we get seen by other parents. Make sure to share this episode or other episodes that you think are relevant for your friends and family to hear. Drop us into the conversation that you're having with your friends, with your family, online, offline. Just make sure that as many parents as possible can get access to the information that we're putting out there. Of course, if you have any topics that you want to come on to discuss with us, or you think, the ladies should discuss this topic, like Eva said, drop us an email, get in contact with us via Instagram. We will hear you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.